I was exhausted juggling 2 jobs just to survive, while my brother flaunted a life of luxury I could only dream of. But everything fell apart when I uncovered the dark secret that had been fueling his lavish lifestyle. What I discovered shattered everything I thought I knew about him, and by the end, he couldn't escape the consequences. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you love, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. They say that money doesn't buy happiness, but what they never tell you is how easily it can buy appearances. My brother Lucas was living proof of that. Designer clothes, expensive watches, and a penthouse apartment with a view that stretched across the entire city skyline. People envied him, admired him, even wanted to be him. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was the darkness that funded all of it. Meanwhile, I was working 2 jobs just to keep my head above water, exhausted beyond words, barely scraping by. I'd go from my morning shift at the coffee shop straight to my late-night cleaning job, coming home to a tiny, suffocating apartment with barely enough money to pay rent or buy groceries. And yet, there he was, my own brother, living a life of effortless luxury as if we hadn't grown up in the same house, faced the same struggles, buried under the same scars. You know, it's strange. People always talk about envy like it's some ugly foreign thing, but I don't think it is. I think envy lives quietly inside you, like a slow, steady burn you try to ignore until it's all you can feel. I envied him, not because I wanted the cars, the watches, or even the money, but because I wanted what those things represented: freedom, a life without fear, a life without struggle, a life where you could finally stop worrying. But my life was nothing like that. Ever since I was a teenager, I learned how to survive alone. After our father walked out and our mother got sick, I had no choice. Someone had to keep things together. Someone had to take care of Mom, and that someone was me. Lucas was always the favorite. Even as a kid, he never heard the word no. Our mother doted on him, made excuses for him, protected him from every consequence. I can still remember all those nights I stayed up late, studying for exams by candlelight because the power had been cut off, while he snuck out to parties, chasing whatever thrill he could find. And somehow, he always landed on his feet. Always. When we became adults, nothing changed. If anything, the gap between us grew wider. I stayed behind, anchored by responsibility, by duty, while Lucas disappeared into a world I could never afford. A world of endless parties, glamorous vacations, beautiful women, and limitless indulgence. He would show up occasionally, flashing his latest Rolex, bragging about his new car, telling stories about the places he'd been: Paris, Dubai, Tokyo, all while I was worrying about how to pay for Mom's medications. It hurt. God, it hurt. Not just because he had what I didn't, but because he never offered to help. Not once. Our mother, the woman who sacrificed everything for us, who gave up her own dreams just to make sure we had food on the table, was now sick and vulnerable. And Lucas, he just kept living like none of it mattered. Like we didn't matter. And yet, every time he smiled at me with that careless charm, every time he gave me those hollow promises, "Don't worry, sis, I'll take care of it." Some part of me wanted to believe him. Some part of me still hoped that behind all that flash, all that arrogance, there was still the brother I used to know. The one who used to make me laugh when I was sad, who used to stand up for me in the schoolyard. But deep down, I knew. I knew that kind of life doesn't come without a price. People don't just wake up one day with everything they've ever wanted, unless they're willing to do anything to get it. And Lucas, he was always willing to do anything. Still, I never expected the truth to be what it was. Looking back now, I realize that his life wasn't just about luxury. It was about masking something much deeper. A wound, an emptiness, a need to prove that he was worth something, even if that meant sacrificing everything that actually mattered. And maybe that's why this story still haunts me, because it's not just about my brother and his secret, it's about all of us. About the ways we hide our pain behind success, behind status, behind the things we think will make us feel alive, until one day those things destroy us. If you've ever looked at someone else's life and thought, why not me? If you've ever felt trapped in a cycle of working, struggling, surviving, while someone else seems to have it all, then you already know how I felt. You already know the weight I carried, the confusion, the resentment, the longing. But you also know the fear of finding out that what looks perfect on the outside might be rotten to the core. That was the fear I lived with every single day, until the day his secret finally caught up with him, and everything changed forever. The moment everything changed wasn't loud. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation or a screaming match. It was quiet, almost forgettable. I called Lucas one evening, my hands shaking as I pressed the phone to my ear. Mom's health had gotten worse, much worse. The doctor said we needed to move her to a private clinic, one that could give her the care she desperately needed. But it wasn't cheap. Nothing ever is when it comes to staying alive. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed in that tiny apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and empty medicine bottles, listening to the dial tone while my heart pounded out of my chest. And then he picked up, "Hey sis, what's up?" His voice was cheerful, carefree, like he had all the time in the world. I could even hear the faint clinking of glasses in the background. Laughter, music. He was at some fancy event again, probably in some rooftop bar with a view I'd never see in person. I swallowed hard and told him everything: the diagnosis, the urgency, the cost. I didn't even ask him for the full amount, just something, anything. But there was this pause, this long, cold silence on his end, and then he said it. "I'm sorry, Camila. I can't right now. Things are complicated. I sat there, stunned, my mind racing through all the images he'd posted recently, vacationing in Greece, shopping in Milan, clubbing in New York. His complicated looked a lot like luxury to me at first. I tried to reason with him, thinking maybe there was something I didn't understand. Maybe he was in debt. Maybe things weren't as good as they seemed. But when I hung up that call, something in me cracked. You know that moment when the person you thought you could rely on shows you, without even meaning to, that you can't, that you're alone. That was my moment. For years I had buried the resentment, the jealousy, the questions. I convinced myself that maybe he just got lucky, that maybe life had given him a break that I didn't get. But after that call, I couldn't ignore it anymore. How could someone who lived in a penthouse, who drove a car worth more than my entire life savings, say he couldn't help his own mother? That's when the suspicion began to grow. Slowly at first, like a seed planted. Deep inside my chest, every new Instagram post, every new story of some extravagant trip or expensive dinner, it all started to look different. Not glamorous, but suspicious. And then came the guilt. I felt guilty for even thinking that way about my own brother. What kind of person was I to doubt him like that? But at the same time, what kind of person was he to leave me to carry all this alone? That's when the anger kicked in. Real, raw, unforgiving anger I felt. Used, betrayed. While I broke my back working 2 jobs, losing sleep, missing meals, wearing the same clothes year after year, he was out there living like a king. But more than the anger, there was this gnawing need to know the truth. So I made a decision that night. I decided to find out how he was really making all that money. Not the stories he told at family dinners about investments and business deals, but the real story, the one he didn't want anyone to know, because deep down, I knew. I knew that no one gets that rich that fast. Not without paying a price. And if he wasn't willing to help Mom, then maybe he wasn't the person I thought he was at all. That decision changed everything. It was the moment I stopped being the dutiful sister who stayed quiet and endured, and became the woman who was ready to confront whatever darkness my brother was hiding, no matter what it cost me. Growing up, Lucas and I were inseparable. We were those siblings that finished each other's sentences, built forts out of blankets, and whispered secrets in the dark when Mom was asleep. I used to believe that nothing, not time, not distance, not even life itself, could break the bond we had. But life doesn't ask for permission to change you. It just does. When Dad left, everything shattered. I was only 15. Lucas was 13. And in those years that followed, we both made choices. Choices that would set us on completely different paths. I threw myself into work any job I could find. First cleaning houses, then waiting tables, then working overnight shifts at the hospital cafeteria, all while taking care of Mom as her health declined. But Lucas chose something else entirely. At first I told myself that he was just lucky, that he found some amazing opportunity, that maybe the world had finally given one of us a break. But I was lying to myself. First, and deep down, that lie appeared the day I visited his apartment unexpectedly. Mom had just taken a turn for the worse, and I was desperate to talk to him in person, to make him see how serious things were. I remember standing in front of that massive glass building, feeling completely out of place in my cheap sneakers and secondhand jacket. The doorman looked me up and down like I didn't belong there, and maybe I didn't, but I went up anyway. Taking the elevator to the penthouse, his place was surreal. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows with views that stretched out endlessly over the city skyline. Designer furniture I'd only seen in magazines. It was the kind of life I'd never even dared to dream about. But it didn't feel warm. It didn't feel like home. It felt staged, cold, artificial. Lucas was surprised to see me, but he welcomed me in with that same charming smile he always had. For a moment, I almost believed that everything was fine. But then, little things started to feel off. He kept checking his phone, stepping away to take calls in the other room, speaking in hushed tones. There were these thick envelopes on the counter, sealed, but unmistakably filled with cash. And then, the women. 2 different women came in and out while I was there, each barely acknowledging me. Their expressions vacant, their clothes suggestive. I asked Lucas about them, trying to keep my voice casual, but he just laughed it off, saying they were friends from work. Friends? What kind of work did he even do? I'd asked him before, and he always gave vague answers. Something about media production, investments, networking, words that meant everything and nothing all at once. But that day, sitting in that sterile apartment watching my little brother act like a stranger, I knew something wasn't right. The warmth we used to share was gone, replaced by something else. Something I couldn't name yet, but that scared me more than I wanted to admit. After I left, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The money, the women, the secrecy. So I did something I'd never done before. I started digging. It began with his social media following tags, checking connections, looking at who he followed and who followed him. Then I started noticing patterns, exclusive events, parties in private villas, collaborations with models I'd never heard of but who all seemed to live these extravagant, curated lives. I found online profiles, aliases, even accounts that seemed darker hidden. The more I looked, the more the puzzle pieces started falling into place. And then I found it. A name that kept appearing in connection with Hima production company that didn't have a website. Lucas wasn't just doing well in business. He was part of something much bigger and much more dangerous. Through some of those forums, I discovered that he was working as a producer for a clandestine pornography network. But not just any pornography, this was high-end exclusive and deeply exploitative. It catered to fetishes so extreme, so dark, that just reading the descriptions made me sick to my stomach. And it wasn't just about consenting adults making content. No, it was about coercion, about manipulation, about exploiting people's vulnerabilities for profit. And my brother, my sweet, funny little brother, was right in the middle of it. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face when we were kids, smiling at me as we rode our bikes down the street. And then I saw him now, behind those glass walls, surrounded by money, by women, by things, but so hollow inside. How? Had we gotten here? How had he gotten here? The dilemma ate away at me. Do I expose him? Do I turn him in, knowing it would destroy him? Ruin our family? Leave Mom heartbroken in her last days? Or do I stay silent? Pretend I didn't know? Carry this secret to my grave and let him keep living this life, while I kept suffering alone? Weeks went by, and the weight of that decision crushed me from the inside out. But then, I realized I couldn't live with the lie. I needed answers. I needed closure, so I confronted him. I called him, told him I needed to meet. He suggested his apartment, but I refused. Instead, we met at a quiet cafe, the kind we used to go to as kids for ice cream. I thought maybe that setting would remind him of who he used to be when he walked in. He looked different, older, harder, colder, but there was still that flash in his eyes, the brother I loved. I didn't waste time. I told him what I knew, that I had found out about his work, that I knew about the network, the productions, the exploitation. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. For a moment, he didn't say anything, and then he exploded. Not in anger, but in this frantic, desperate flood of words. He told me everything. How it started with small gigs, how the money was so easy, how the attention made him feel powerful, wanted, desired things. He said he never felt growing up, especially after Dad left and Mom got sick. He said that for the first time in his life, he wasn't invisible, wasn't the forgotten child. He was somebody. And then it just spiraled. The money got bigger, the clients got darker, and he couldn't stop. He didn't want to stop. He confessed that he needed the luxury, the power, the control. It was like a drug. He said he knew it was wrong, but that every time he tried to get out, they pulled him back in with promises of more money, more status, more everything he thought he ever wanted. I sat there, listening to him pour out his soul, torn between heartbreak and fury. How could the same man who refused to help our dying mother justify spending thousands on designer clothes and yachts? How could he betray not just me, but himself? That conversation shattered me, but it also made one thing brutally clear. He was trapped not just by the network, but by his own addiction to that life. And I was the only one who could decide what to do next. It was just after 3 a.m. when my phone rang. At first I thought it was a wrong number. No one calls at that hour unless it's something tragic. My heart dropped into my stomach before I even answered. The voice on the other end was cold, detached. "Are you Camila? We need you to come to the downtown precinct. It's about your brother, Lucas." For a few seconds, everything around me blurred the walls of my small apartment. The cheap clock ticking above the stove, the stack of unpaid bills on the table. I could barely breathe. I didn't ask questions. I just threw on the first clothes I found and ran out into the night. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your own footsteps sound deafening. The entire drive there, my mind was racing, filling in the blanks with every possible nightmare. Car accident, mugging, had he finally pushed things too far? But nothing. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I walked into that precinct. The fluorescent lights made everything look harsher, colder. The officers behind the desk barely glanced at me as I told them my name, my voice trembling so much I could barely get the words out. They asked me to sit. I couldn't. I paced, gripping the strap of my bag so tightly my fingers went numb. Then, after what felt like an eternity, one of them motioned for me to follow. Down a hallway that smelled of bleach and regret, past locked doors and tired faces, and then I saw him, Lucas, my little brother, my best friend. He was sitting on a metal bench, his wrists cuffed in front of him, his head bowed so low that for a second I wasn't even sure it was him. But then he looked up, and the look in his eyes, I will never forget it for as long as I live. It wasn't just fear, it wasn't just shame, it was something deeper. Like a man who had finally been caught by the very demons he'd spent years running from. His face was pale, bruised in places. I couldn't explain. His designer clothes replaced by a cheap gray hoodie and ripped jeans. The same man who used to post photos sipping champagne on yachts, posing next to luxury cars, was now sitting there, shackled, broken, stripped of everything except the raw consequences of his choices. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to scream at him, to shake him, to ask him why. But I was frozen, paralyzed by the collision of two truths I couldn't reconcile. That he was both the boy I loved more than anything, and the man who had caused so much harm. I stood there, my nails digging into my palms, feeling this impossible mixture of grief and relief. Love and rage. An officer came over and explained everything in this flat procedural voice, as if he were reading the weather report. Your brother was arrested as part of an international operation to dismantle a major pornography trafficking network. He's facing multiple charges: production, distribution, exploitation. The words hit me like physical blows, each one knocking the air out of my lungs. International operation, trafficking, exploitation. My brain couldn't even process it all. I just kept staring at Lucas, hoping he'd say something, anything, that would make this make sense. And then, finally, he did. Barely a whisper, but I heard it. I'm sorry, Cammy. His voice cracked on my name like it was breaking under the weight of years of lies. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe that he was sorry, that he regretted everything, that somehow, some way, we could go back to before eyes of the officers on me, waiting to see what I'd do. But what do you do when the person you've spent your whole life protecting is suddenly the one who needs protection from himself? I sat down across from him, my knees weak, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode right there in that sterile room. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, the silence heavier than any words could be. I searched his face for traces of the brother I knew, the goofy grin, the mischievous spark in his eyes, but all I saw was exhaustion. Like he hadn't just been arrested, but like he'd finally stopped running, and maybe a part of him was relieved. He told me bits and pieces through choked sobs, how the network had been under investigation for over a year, how they finally caught him after tracking encrypted communications and financial transactions linked to some of the biggest names in the industry, how he was facing years, maybe decades in prison, how he had known deep down that this day would come, but that he couldn't stop, that he didn't know how to stop. And I just listened, because what else could I do? I wanted to scream that I'd warned him, that I'd begged him to get out, that I'd seen this coming, but none of that mattered now. The damage was done. The choices had been made, and now he was paying the price. I remembered all those nights working double shifts, coming home to take care of Mom, wondering where he was, what he was doing, and now I knew. I remembered asking him for help with her medical bills, begging him to be there for her, for me, and him turning me away with empty excuses and fake smiles. And now here he was, sitting in front of me, completely undone by the very life he had chosen over us. The officers said I couldn't stay long, that they had to process him and prepare him for transfer. I nodded, numb, as they stood him up and led him away. Watching them lock the cuffs tighter around his wrists felt like someone was locking something around my heart too, as they took him down the hallway. He looked back at me one last time, and in that look, I saw everything: the fear, the regret, the love, the loss, and the undeniable truth that he was now a prisoner, not just of the legal system, but of the very choices he thought would set him free. When the doors closed behind him, I just stood there, alone in that cold fluorescent-lit hallway, and in that moment, I realized this was the most intense, heartbreaking, and defining moment of my entire life. The man I had admired, envied, loved, was gone, and all that was left was the devastating reality of what happens when the seduction of luxury blinds you to the price you're really paying for the first time in years. I could finally breathe, not because Lucas had fallen, not because he was facing the consequences of his choices, but because I no longer felt trapped in his shadow, suffocating under the weight of a comparison I never asked for. For so long, I had measured my worth against his success, the expensive cars, the designer clothes, the glamorous trips, all those things he paraded while I struggled to keep our lives afloat. Working 2 jobs, sacrificing sleep and dreams just to make sure Mom was taken care of. I used to ask myself over and over again what was wrong with me, why I wasn't enough, why I couldn't be like him, live like him, win like him. But now, standing in the quiet of my small apartment, looking out the window as the city moved on without even knowing what had happened to him, I realized something I had never dared to admit before. I didn't need any of that. I didn't need his approval or the world's admiration or some twisted validation that I was good enough. I was already enough. I always had been. The toxic comparison, the silent battles I fought alone every day, the deep ache of feeling less than him, it all began to loosen its grip on my chest. I thought about Mom, still fighting through her illness with a strength that no one ever applauded because it wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And I thought about my own life, my own path, the dreams I had put on hold for so long, waiting for someone else to acknowledge them. I decided in that moment that I wasn't going to live like that anymore. No more chasing after someone else's version of success. No more waiting for someone to save me. No more letting the wounds of my past define my future. I chose to focus on what truly mattered, my career, my passions, and most of all, caring for the woman who had given me everything even when she had nothing left to give. That night, as I sat by Mom's bedside, holding her frail hand and listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not because life was perfect, not because all the pain had disappeared, but because I had finally let go of the chains that had bound me for so long. I was free not from my brother's failure, but from my own need to compare, to compete, to be seen through someone else's eyes. And in that freedom, I found the strength to move forward on my own terms. For the first time in my life for years, I believed that value came from what you showed the world, how much you earned, how well you dressed, how many people admired you. Watching Lucas live that way, so confidently, so unapologetically, made me question myself every single day. But when everything crumbled, when I saw the man behind the image, the brokenness, the addiction, the lies, I finally understood something that changed me forever. True worth isn't about status, luxury, or appearances. It's about integrity. It's about who you are when no one's watching. About the love you give freely, not the validation you crave. I realized I had spent so much of my life carrying guilt for not being enough, for not making more money, for not being the perfect daughter, for not having the glamorous life my brother had. But that guilt was never mine to carry. I was already enough simply because I chose honesty over illusion, sacrifice over selfishness, love over pride. That realization didn't come easily, but when it did, it changed everything. I started setting boundaries even with my own family. I stopped feeling responsible for fixing everyone's mess, for covering up mistakes that weren't mine to hide. I stopped chasing after people who only valued me when I was useful to them. For the first time, I learned to say no without apologizing, to prioritize my peace over their approval. And in doing that, I found a strength I never knew I had, the strength to live life on my terms, not dictated by someone else's definition of success. I chose authenticity over perfection, healing over hiding. And most importantly, I chose to love myself fully and without condition for everything I had survived, for everything I had built with my own 2 hands, despite the odds. That was my real victory, not proving I was better than Lucas, but proving that I was finally free from the need to compare, to compete, to seek worth outside of myself. And now, I turn to you, and I ask, how much longer are you going to keep running from yourself, pretending that appearances are enough to fill the emptiness inside? You see, my brother taught me a painful lesson: luxury can be a beautiful mask, but it's often just hiding the wounds you refuse to confront. And maybe, just maybe, you've been doing the same. Living for the likes, the status, the approval, building a life that looks perfect on the outside but feels hollow when you're alone with your thoughts. I know how easy it is to get trapped there, to believe that if you just get that promotion, that car, that relationship, then you'll finally be enough. But you won't. Not like that, because real worth doesn't come from what people comes from what you dare to face inside yourself. If this story resonated with you, if you feel that quiet ache of living, just to seem okay, please stop, take a breath. Look in the mirror, not to judge your reflection, but to ask, who am I when no one is watching? What am I really afraid of? My brother waited too long. He kept running until the world caught up with him, and by then, everything he built on that fragile illusion crumbled in an instant. Don't let that be your story too. You don't have to wait for a crisis to set yourself free. The first, most courageous step is to realize that you don't have to prove anything to anyone, not to your family, not to your friends, not to strangers on the internet. You just need to be whole, be honest, be you, fully and without shame. And if that feels too heavy to do alone, seek help. Talk to someone you trust. Break the silence before it breaks you. Because no luxury, no success, no applause will ever fill the space that only truth can occupy. If you've ever been through something similar, being betrayed by the person you trusted most, or struggling against appearances that imprison you, I want to invite you to tell your story in the comments. Here, no one will judge you, because this channel is a safe space where we transform pain into strength and shame into liberation. You are not alone in this silent struggle, and together, we are stronger to face the internal storms that life brings. No matter how far you've gone, how many times you've fallen or gotten lost in the search for approval, there is always a way back to who you really are, to your truth, to the freedom that comes when you fully accept yourself. So open your heart, share, connect. Here, your story matters and can be the light that guides someone in the darkness. Subscribe to the channel and keep watching this video that is appearing on your screen.